Okay, it's 12:40 and the inquiry is resumed. So over to you, Mr. Simons.
Thank you, Madam. And good. Of course.
Yeah.
Take a moment. Take a moment. Let me know.
I should also say I don't know why, but the and it's not the Wi-Fi. My computer's been a little slow. So.
Or should I just give you them, Madam, just while Mr. Wharton's trying to sort of hotspot himself? Just, I think the one document it would be handy to have, in addition to the maybe the evidence of Mr. Hodges, definitely the evidence of Mr. Wharton, of course. But the one core document would be the Statement of Common Ground on Highways, which is core document 9.2a.
I'm sorry, do you have the reference from Mr. Hodges?
I don't. I never do the proofs. I don't know why. Let me just find it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. 10 points. Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
I'll just let the inspector get that. You get those documents as well, the Statement of Common Ground as well, and the proofs. Framework as well. I just thought that it'd be worth having the MPPF as well. Sorry, Madam, which is whether you've got your own.
That separately.
You've got that separately. All right, Mr. Wharton.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Wharton. You've got your microphone on. You produced a proof of evidence where you tell us at page 3 that you're Ian Wharton. You're an associate director at Ardent, based in their Essex office. You've got a BA in geography from Oxford. You're a member of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, over 16 years as a transport planner. And indeed, you tell us at 1.7 that you've been involved in supporting law with the promotion of the development of this site since 2018, and you were involved in the production of the transport assessment that was submitted alongside the planning application. Is all of that correct?
It is.
Right. Now, I'm going to ask you principally, all but this next question is going to be on the topic of locational sustainability and accessibility to services and facilities by the different modes of transport. It's the focus of the authority's reason for refusal. But before I ask about that, which is the mainstay of your evidence in chief, just one question. In terms of technical highways objections, so it matters so far as the highways access go, severe impacts on the highways network or whatever, safety go. Can you just walk us through at a high level, because obviously it is all agreed, but just can you walk the inspector through what the position is with Essex on those highway safety issues?
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. In terms of highway safety, highway capacity, mitigation measures, and impacts in terms of severity, all of those matters have been agreed with the County Council Highways, and that is evidenced in the Statement of Common Ground with that, sorry, the Highway Statement of Common Ground. And it's contained in the conclusions of chapter 8 of that document. Sorry, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see if if there are any questions about what's agreed there, that's fine, but that's where it is. Now, turning on then to what the issue is with the local authority in any event, it's this topic of locational sustainability. And I'm going to ask you to sort of break it down mode by mode, if you like. cycling, public transport, walking. But before we do that, just at a higher level, how do you, as a transport planner, approach this issue of locational sustainability?
I think it's the same as in terms of general planning terms. You try and target the residential growth to the settlements that have the highest number of facilities and services, and very much put them in the settlement hierarchy. And in this case, being on the edge of the settlement of Basildon puts this site in the context of being very close to the most important, largest settlement in the borough, with the most facilities and the most services.
What do you consider to be, if we turn up the framework just briefly for a moment before we get into the detail of your of the numbers and all the different walk times and everything, but insofar as the overall approach goes, in the framework chapter 9, sorry, is the sustainable transport chapter on page 30. We touched, I think, with Mr. Hargest on some of the paragraphs in this section. In particular, you might remember we touched on paragraph 105 that talks about significant development being focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of modes, of transport modes. And I also asked him about 110A, which is a couple of pages on, that talks about taking up appropriate opportunities, top of page 32, appropriate opportunities to provide sustainable transport modes that can be or have been taken up given the type of development and given its location. What are your reflections on, if you like, what tests are the NPPF setting? What are we being asked to consider when it comes to assessing this topic of locational sustainability?
I think you're looking at trying to put development in the locations again with the most services and facilities, and giving people the options to travel by different modes. So yeah, paragraph 105 is quite clear on that. You look at sustainable travel modes for various different users, and it also highlights the distinction between urban and rural areas. So, and what might apply sustainability in a rural setting is not necessarily the same as what would be considered sustainable in a sort of a more urban sense.
When the paragraph talks about this idea of genuine choice, what do you take from that as a transport planner? Mr. Hargest had his own idea about what it might mean. What's your sense of what a genuine choice looks like?
I think it's the ability to travel by exactly what it says on the tin. You have the ability to travel by walking, cycling, public transport, to different modes of different facilities and services.
What about that? A few words before the same sentence, the idea about locations which either are or can be made sustainable. What do you think the framework's getting at there?
I think it's an acknowledgement that not all sites are sustainable from the outset, but can be improved and enhanced through sort of measures that are put in place. Right.
Thank you very much. Now let's start to zoom in a little bit to the particular modes that you've assessed in your evidence, and indeed the modes that you've been through in the statement of common ground with Essex. Why don't we start with cycling? We'll work through them. So cycling, what's the position in your judgment, and in that of Essex as well, so far as the site's accessibility to services, facilities, etc., by way of cycling?
I think it's got a good level of accessibility for cycling. You've got the ability to connect to a number of different cycle routes locally, and you can achieve distances from a cycling basis to reach the key local services and facilities, particularly within Basildon, but not explicitly within Basildon, but particularly within Basildon.
What Sorry, what is the position agreed with Essex so far as the cycling goes?
That the site is accessible.
Is there anywhere particular in the document to show us?
Bear with me a second. Paragraph 3.19 of the Highway Statement of Common Ground.
See, that's on page 9.
Right.
Yes.
And 3.19, it notes that it's agreed that the site is located within acceptable walking and cycling distances of a range of facilities.
So far as cycling goes, are there any particular improvements, mitigation measures, or whatever that the inspector needs to be aware of? We'll come perhaps to the detail. We could come to it now, but we'll also touch on it at the 106 session as well. But is there anything that you want to draw to our attention, particularly with an eye on cyclists?
I mean, in terms of the southern boundary of the site, there is already an existing shared footway and cycleway route that runs effectively the length of the A127 at present. The proposals that were shared yesterday and that are included in the section 106, there's drawing 184770-014 Rev A. And that shows how the site at the southern boundary would interface with that pedestrian and cyclist location, with an emphasis on some improvements there to slightly widen that existing shared footway cycleway route.
Taking a step back, as it were, the council, Mr. Hargest, was at pains to emphasise the importance of other modes of sustainable transport, to which will come, perhaps sometimes to the detriment of cycling, and as much as cycling, if you like, wasn't top tier insofar as importance he was at pains to emphasise. What's your view on the level of significance that the inspector can attribute to the agreed position on the sustainability of the site by way of cycling? How much of a big deal is it?
I think it's a fairly large deal, because cycling, in terms of the ability to allow for modal shift, is quite high. It's the site itself is providing fully compliant cycle parking standards throughout the units that are proposed, and yeah, it's one of the areas that people can reach a significant distance, more so than obviously by other modes, from a site.
Thank you. Right, let's change tack. I'll ask you now about the topic of public transport. So could you give the inspector, I suppose, first at a high level, then starting to drill down, I suppose, what we're going to end up talking about the bus service in a moment, but at a high level, what the position is with respect to public transport, both existing and proposed, and I suppose also picking up on the view that was agreed with Essex on this topic.
In terms of the public transport offering, there are existing bus stops on High Road North, which serve route number 9. That is about 1 kilometre away, give or take, from the site on average. The bus stops on Dunton Road themselves are frequented by a fairly limited service, the 256. It runs, I think it's 3 days a week, and with only 1 bus a day, so it's not particularly user friendly, as local residents have sort of attested over the last sort of 2 days.
Okay. What steps are proposed so far as bus services go?
So there's a contribution, section 106 contribution of just over £1 million that is being secured through the Section 106 payable to Essex Passenger Transport for them to operate a much enhanced service, and details of that are set out in the Highway Statement of Common Ground at section or paragraph 7.6 and 7.7 on page 13.
Would you mind just walking us through what that says? Obviously, we can all read it, but which bits of it are important so far as your opinion goes? So this is pages 13 and 14 on the Highway Statement of Common Ground, under the heading sustainable transport brackets passenger transport. What does the inspector need to focus on in your view?
If I'm being perfectly honest, I'd suggest all of it really. The new service links Billericay Station with Basildon Hospital. It sets out a number of key locations that comprise transport infrastructure hubs, town centres, obviously the development site, the key employment zones, shopping outlets, and educational facilities as well.
So I know this might sound like an obvious question, what is the relevance of that? So you're saying that we've got a list of likely bus stops and it's got loads of things on it, town centres, transport hubs, shopping areas, but so what?
Oh, it gives people the opportunity to connect to the facilities that they would be looking for to either work or for retail or to travel on as part of a commuter.
What's your evaluation then of this list of what they're called key locations? But what's your evaluation of them so far as the attractiveness to people who might want to actually use this service?
I'd say it's pretty substantial. I'd say that if you're going to connect to the local facilities, these are the key facilities in the vicinity that you would want to connect
along broadly these sorts of lines. Do we know what the county has in the past been thinking about with regard to this route?
I believe the county have considered putting something forward along these lines in the past, but they have been unable to, or they haven't been able to put a service together.
What about the operation times? We've got Monday to Saturday, 7 in the morning until 7 at night, hourly. Mm-hmm. What's your evaluation of that proposal?
I think it's a good offering. It's certainly, I think Mr. Hargis used the word substantially improves over. I acknowledge he did say a fairly poor baseline, but he did say it's a substantial upgrade in the bus service provision. Putting
the baseline to one side, I mean, how would you evaluate it in terms of the likelihood or not of it forming an attractive, or if you like, a genuine choice in the language of the framework? Or what does this sort of these timings, this frequency, these days of the week, how genuine is it a choice?
Oh, it's genuine. It gives people the opportunity to travel for commuting purposes to sort of other locations. It will pick up the also into the Saturday. I mean, usually on a Saturday, a lot of services are curtailed at a much earlier period of time than we're proposing here. So, yeah, from that point of view, you get a regularity of service.
It's not 7 days a week. That's one thing Mr. Hargis says. So what's your response? Obviously, it's not that point's not troubled Essex, but does it trouble you?
No, I mean it's clearly that if it was on a Sunday, then that would benefit in some residents to allow them to travel, but it doesn't. Sunday services are pretty poorly used in the main, so the key periods are the weekdays and into the sort of the Saturday.
And the other point he takes against it, so far as the timings go, is that it stops at 7, i.e. 7 p.m. That is, i.e. only 7 p.m. So which is to say, the intention is not that it runs later on into the night time. And he sort of is critical of it from that point of view. So what's your position on the end time, Monday to Saturday?
Yeah. I mean, it still gives people the opportunity to use the service to commute from their place of work, but clearly there are differences in where people work and what people do, but it gives people the options to be able to use the bus service.
Now, he also makes a point about procedure, if you like, because at 7.8 of the Statement of Common Ground, it's explained that the final service will be procured and tendered by Essex County Council Passenger Transport. This is a standard approach to passenger provision within Essex, whereby the County Council has control over routes and services for the best of the overall population. ECC aims, we're told in the next paragraph, to set up bus services in order that they become commercially viable. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
Now, just to sort of break down what's being said there, because as I say, this is part of what is the critique that Mr. Hargis levels against the bus service. The first thing that he says is that it would have been, should have been open to you on behalf of the appellant to go to bus operators, to go to them directly and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this route? And he says no evidence that that's been done. So there's no statement from a bus operator saying we'll take it in the event that the appeal is allowed or whatever. Now let's work on that. What's your assessment of that proposition?
He's correct that we haven't, as developers, approached the bus operators directly, but that is, as I say, Essex County Council's standard approach, that they themselves seek to provide the bus services, and because they are in control of it, they are able to manage the bus route network for the best of the population and to provide routes on desire lines that are necessary. But
Mr. Hargis says, in his experience, perfectly common thing to do for a developer to go off and contact a bus operator directly.
It may be in other areas. For my experience in Essex, that's not the case. For the last 12 years or so, I haven't had to do that or been requested to do that by Essex County Council. And the approach that you see before you, ma'am, is exactly the same as any other site that I've worked on over the last decade.
Okay. The next criticism that is made of the contribution, the approach that's being taken to the £1 million+ contribution that goes towards setting this service up, is that it is only £1 million in rough. It's not exactly £1 million, but in rough figures, it's only that much, and it's not more. Which is to say that the intention is to pump prime a bus service for 5 years, but that's it, as it were. Mr. Hargis says that for him, he would want the bus service to be, if you like, guaranteed in perpetuity, as it were. Paraphrasing Inspector Scott, note of what he said. So, what's your response on this topic of the 5 years? Whether or not that's enough? What do you expect to happen at the end of 5 years on all of that? How can the inspector? How much comfort can the inspector have about all of that?
I mean, in terms of the requested contribution, as I say, it's a standard approach from Essex County Council's perspective, but in terms of either the contribution in terms of the value of it or the period of time that they're setting out for the pump prime element, if Essex had concerns over the viability of the route, you would imagine that they would have requested either a larger sum or a longer duration for the pump prime service to be operational. And I think that's borne out by the destinations that you see on the previous paragraph.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it picks up a large untapped residential population. I think if I could just draw your attention to paragraph 7.7 on page 14 of the Highway Statement of Common Ground.
7.7 on the Highway Statement of Common Ground. These are the bullet points that list all the different destinations.
Yeah, just below details in terms of the duration of service in terms of Monday to Saturday 7 till 7 and hourly service. Actually identifies a number of areas that are not particularly well connected currently by the public transport. They are only served by the service 256, which runs, as I say, 3 days a week.
So these areas, but you mean Tycombe and Little Bursted?
Tycombe and Little Bursted,
etc.
Dunton Road itself, and the No Kill Road. But on top of that, also the southern part of Billericay is also currently not provided a similar route as well. And you can see that on I can show you in terms of the bush route map.
So what though, I think again to put Mr. Harger's case to you for your consideration, what's to say that we get to the end of this 5-year period, let's say the inspector grants permission and the bus service contribution is paid to Essex, and let's say that they get an operator and the new bus service begins, but we get to the end of the 5-year period and it's decided that, well, we don't want to keep going anymore, sort of thing. How much of a concern is that? What does the inspector need to think about when it comes to evaluating the prospect of that happening?
Yeah, as I say, I think this is a route that the county council have been looking at introducing for quite some time, and it picks up the potential for a large amount of passenger fare reclaim to make it commercially viable. So that is effectively, it is a very good level of service going through a large number of key locations, and that in itself would have the ability to generate the revenues to make it commercially viable.
What then? What then is your view of the prospect of us getting, if you like, notionally to year 5 or whatever, and to the whole thing going pop, to the service simply ceasing to exist?
I think it's incredibly low. I mean, in terms of the commercial viability of it, it is I believe a commercially viable route.
At 7.9 of the Statement of Common Ground that you've just been taking us through is a reference to commercially viable, which touches on what the answers that you've just been giving. At 7.10, it says it's agreed that the provision of this enhanced bus service is a significant benefit to the residents of the appeal scheme, along with enhancing sustainable bus access and onward connections, etc., for existing residents living along the route. Could you give us a flavour of the extent of benefit, not just for residents who are within the scheme, but more widely? Because we've heard quite a lot about from residents who have been speaking, certainly on the first day of the inquiry, about some dissatisfaction with the quality of the buses.
If I could turn to the... Oh, sorry, it'll be in the Statement of Common Ground appendix, with the bus route on it.
Right, that's the... I think is it the very last... No, hang on. Yeah, it's the third from last page, I think, of the PDF. Is that the proposed bus route plan?
That is indeed, yeah.
So 1, 2, 3 pages from the end.
So I draw your attention to, as you're coming south from Billericay, and if you go west where it turns at Sun Corner, that southern part of Billericay currently is only served by the bus route 256. Going south of that is Tycombe, and you've got areas such as Frithwood Lane. Likewise, they're only served by the 256 bus service. It then passes through Little Bursted, and then comes past the development site. So in terms of all of those locations, they have an existing poor level of service. And then beyond that, as we go eastward towards or into Steeple View, we've heard from residents in terms of the fact that the bus service along Dunton Road isn't particularly great, but also those residents would have the benefits of using the upgraded bus stops on Dunton Road where this service is going to pass by.
Could I ask you about those upgrades to the bus stops? What exactly is envisaged so far as upgrades, so far as bus stop upgrades go? What's been asked for by the county and what's being suggested?
If you, again, in the same highway statement and common ground, page 19, and it says condition 9 in terms of this was the consultation response from Essex County Council. But it's improved facilities with bus shelter, raised curbs, hard standing ancillary infrastructure on both sides of Dunton Road. So effectively, castle curb, step-free access for for passengers.
And again, so this might be a bit of a stupid question, but so what? I mean, what is the significance? What are the implications of those improvements in terms of inducing people to actually use the bus services that are laid on?
It's a greater quality piece of infrastructure in terms of the bus stop itself, and it allows residents with mobility issues to have step-free access onto the bus network. Thank you.
Now, that's it for now on buses. We're going to come to walking, but just before we do, just briefly, access by car. Access by car. What's your position for those who would seek to access the application site by car, or I suppose either their own car or someone else's car, be it in a taxi or an Uber, or to get deliveries by car or whatever it might be? What's your position on that?
Well, the access points themselves have been designed to the relevant design standards. They've been safety audited and have no issues raised, and the Highway Authority have confirmed that they are sort of appropriately designed access points.
What's the relevance of the ability to use taxis, or indeed to get more of our goods and services by delivery than we used to when it comes to thinking about locational sustainability?
Again, it gives people the options to connect to local facilities without necessarily having to own a car themselves. So with .com deliveries, for example, the ability to access a site via vehicular access is as important. I'm not saying it is, it is an important factor to have something that people can access.
Right. Next, walking. So accessibility of the site for pedestrians. What then is your assessment of its accessibility to local services and facilities for pedestrians? We've looked a lot at tables with distances on them. I'd like to do that again, but also I'd also like you to, I don't know the extent to which the inspector's actually done these walks yet, but to actually show her what, on a plan, if you can, what you consider the key routes to be, both in terms of how long they are, but also what the experience, if you like, is what would be for those who would seek to use them. So take it away. Which
it's there is the statement of common ground in respect to walking routes.
Yes, that is 9.1b. That's probably worth getting at as well. No, document 9.1b is it's called a note of walking distances / time agreed statements of common ground. This is with the local authority. Right. Okay. Far away. Where would you like to take us?
Well, to the figures contained at the end of that, set out the measured walking routes to the nearest facilities of each relevant type of facility. Sorry, I'm just playing around with my
Not at all.
my pages. So I think the key ones to know would be the routes to the primary schools,
Right.
and the preschool.
Yeah. So that's 2 and 3.
Yeah. So there's 2 primary schools in the vicinity. There's one south of the A127 at Millhouse, and the routes to access that would be via the southern entrance onto the shared footway cycleway near to the A127 or adjacent to the A127.
This is figure 3, right? Isn't
This
it?
is figure
For
3,
Millhouse.
sorry, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Just for clarity.
Yeah.
And then as you come along the A127, that there is effectively a route choice at that point where pedestrians can either travel along the footpath and go north into the Steeple View estate, and walk along King's Crescent, or they can continue along the A127 before crossing the road and the overbridge, which we have heard a lot about over the last last 24 hours. And then south of the A127, following crossing it, you would head south and along Holst Avenue before again turning down into south into Tavistock Road.
And then you get a couple of roads down to you can read it, Millhouse School, denoted on the map.
Yeah, identified as PS2.
Identified as PS2, right. So just taking that, we won't do every single, we don't do this for every single facility, but just to take that as an example. So Millhouse's school, PS2, if we've seen the walk or the potential walks that one could do. If we scroll up a couple of pages to page 4 of this document, so you've got it in hard copy, the text before the figures. We know from the table 1, second line down, we know how far that walk is, and we know roughly how long it takes from the different distances and then time minutes that are all agreed. Okay, so what's your evaluation then of the acceptability or non-acceptability of access by foot to this destination?
Well, it's acceptable in the CIHT terms. It is within the acceptable preferred maximum of walking distance to primary schools.
Well, let's just dwell on that for a moment. You've referred there to something called we looked at these with Mr. Hargis, preferred maximum distance of 2,000 metres. That's from a document from 2000 that refers to desirable, acceptable and preferred maximums of, I think it's 500, 1,000 and 2,000 metres, something like that. What is your evidence to the inspector on, if you like, what are the thresholds she needs to have in her mind when she's reviewing these different distances? You've talked about preferred maximum. Mr. Hargis talks a lot more about desirable. What is the right approach and why?
Well, there's no evidence to suggest that people won't walk up to that 2,000 preferred maximum distance, and in fact, the suggestion of preferred is very much that there is no explicit guidance as to what constitutes the distances. So this is the preferred maximum for walking to a primary school as set out in this CIHT document is as it is.
If we've not got any fixed guidance anyway from government or whatever, the NPPF doesn't tell us what the answer is, what's your judgment then? Because I mean we've heard a lot from the Rule 6 party and the council about, if you like, the realism of expecting people to make the journey that you've just described to get to school on a rainy winter's day or whatever. What is your assessment of that route so far as it, offering a genuine choice or not for people who might want to use it?
Well, I believe it is a genuine choice. You're walking from the site onto a shared footway and cycleway. You've got the ability to cross at a controlled crossing facility to then access an overbridge, and all those elements are viable for a person to be able to walk to a primary school. And I've myself witnessed people using the overbridge on primary school or school days, both primary school age and secondary school age.
What it boils down to, as you explain in this table 1, is depending on where you live on the site, it's somewhere between a 15-minute walk to school and a 20-minute walk to school, average of 18, but obviously it depends on where you live, so the average probably doesn't matter too much. And again, focusing not so much on distances for a moment, but on time. What's your judgment on the acceptability or not of a 15 to 20-minute walk to school?
I mean, I think that's an acceptable time for somebody to be able to walk to a primary school.
Right. What are the other? Again, we're not going to do all of them. What are other key routes to key services and facilities that you'd like to just take the inspector through?
I think the routes along the northern side of so coming along Dunton Road from the site, you would be, if you're traveling towards the Note Bridge direction.
Which one are you looking at?
Sorry, I'm looking at we can continue with figure 2.
Figure 2. This is the one that takes us. Is this the one that takes us to PS1? Is it?
Yep, PS1 and PRS1.
Okay.
So,
what are those?
So PRS1 is the Willowfields preschool, which is contained within the Steepleview Community Centre. And that is a daily nursery, and that's within a 13-minute walk of the development site on average.
Okay.
And then there are even though it's not shown on this particular one, that's also effectively adjacent to the nearest shop, so the Londis at Willowfield. And then beyond that, the route that you can see on figure 2 that goes along the Wash Road and then takes you down into Note Bridge as the route that you would walk if you were going to the Note Bridge Primary School. Now,
the Note Bridge Primary School, we see from your table 1, that's regardless of where you are, regardless of where you live within the development, the Note Bridge Primary School would be in excess of 2 kilometres. So we're talking anywhere from a 25-minute walk to a 31-minute walk along this route that you've just explained. So why then have you shown it?
Because it's still a viable route for people to walk. The preferred maximum is 2,000 meters, but that is, as it says, preferred maximum. The Essex only request contributions to school transport at a 3.2 kilometre distance. Now, I'm not suggesting that people would walk 3.2 kilometres to the primary school, but it gives a flavour for the fact that there is an understanding that the 2 kilometre distance is not necessarily a hard and fast distance.
Are there any other routes that you'd like to illustrate for the inspector?
The figure 4.
Figure 4
is to the James Hornsby Secondary School. I won't dwell on it too much, but it's effectively the same route as the route that we've just reviewed on figure 3 to Millhouse Primary, except it goes a little bit further south.
And again, so overall, what's your view on the acceptability or not of that of the route shown on figure 4 as a route?
As a route, I believe it's acceptable.
Can I ask you in particular then about the requirement to cross the A127, which is brought in by some but not all of the routes that you've illustrated. Some of them, and this is one of them, require us to cross the A127 in order to get to the south into the heart of Basildon. Now, your view then on the need to cross the 127 is one of the things that the council criticises, if you like. Your view on the relevance of it and how it plays into your analysis of whether or not the routes are acceptable.
Well, it's certainly a viable and acceptable route. You've got the ability for residents to reach the facilities south of the A127 and conversely north of the 127 should you be coming from the south. I would have more concerns had there be no overbridge there in the first place.
What about the ability of wheelchair users, for example, to pick up on one of the things that Mr. Hard just talked about, to access the south of Basildon using their wheelchairs over the A127?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? Sorry.
Wheelchair users.
Remember,
Mr. Hard just talked about. I think he gave the example of wheelchair users, unless I've misremembered, as a category of people who would struggle to navigate the overbridge, as one example. What's your response to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I accept that it's an existing situation, and mobility scooters would not be able to go across the overbridge.
And so what? What's the consequence of all of that? I mean, Mr. Harger says that's one of the things that makes this not an acceptable route, not an acceptable proposition so far as locational sustainability goes.
Well, I think it's the case that people can travel by other modes of travel as well as sort of by a mobility scooter. So as we touched on earlier, you still have the ability to access facilities via other modes, so bus travel and likewise private car.
When in the end you reflect on overall where this takes us so far as the extent to which residents would have a genuine choice, what do you conclude so far as the pedestrian modes go?
They've got a genuine choice to be able to access facilities locally.
Let me just put one particular detail point to you, if you don't mind. Mr. Hargest includes appended to his proof of evidence lots and lots of different documents from different time periods and different organisations that refer to different things, different distances. Some of them talk about 2 kilometres, as we've talked about already. That's manual for streets. The IHT one talks about desirable, acceptable, preferred, maximum. One of them, though, is the Essex Design Guide, which is the document that he alleges that Essex, as Highways Authority, have failed to follow, which is what his answer when the inspector asked him about the weight to which he would attribute to the agreed statement of common ground with Essex. That is a document which you don't need to send it up, but it's his Appendix A, and I'll just read it out. It says that no part of a residential area, this is the Essex Design Guide, should be farther than 400 metres from a regular bus route, 600 metres from a primary school, 1,500 metres from a secondary school. That's the Essex Design Guide. So what about those criteria?
I think you need to consider the Essex Design Guide for what it is. It is a design guide. It's not a prescription on these distances for every development. And if that was the case, then every village settlement, every rural location would need to be within the criteria that set out there. And
Are they?
No.
Are there any proposed mitigation works the inspector needs to be aware of, which would be relevant to the pedestrian experience rather than to bus users? Or I suppose they might be relevant to cyclists as well if they're on the pavements or roads or whatever. But any particular things that she needs to be aware of that are targeted, if you like, at improving the experience of pedestrians?
Yeah, I will just put my paperwork away.
Sort your desk out, absolutely.
In terms of pedestrian improvements, firstly, again, turning to drawing 0148, 1847700 that was provided yesterday as part of the section 106, that in conjunction with the cycleway improvement is effectively the same. It's a shared footway and cycleway improvement. If you turn over onto the following page in the package, the same one I've got, you've got drawing 011, which seeks to provide some low-level lighting along the corner of Church Road and South Wash Road. The drawing 013A seeks to extend the footway and provide uncontrolled crossing point on the Wash Road, which aligns with the route that was shown within figure 2. And prior to that, drawing 012A, which likewise seeks to make some minor improvements to crossing points at the Wash Road, Pound Lane junction. There are other minor pedestrian improvements as part of the highways junction changes that are proposed at the Dunton Road, High Road North and the Wash Road junction, and onto the Noak Hill Road, and they're both evidenced in the drawings that are contained in the highway statement of common ground, which
9.2A again, and they are the drawings begin at PDF page 25 towards the back.
Drawing 003C and drawing 004A both have an element of pedestrian improvements to them.
Thank you. Now, I'd like, again, you've looked at a bit of detail on the different modes, on cycling, public transport, walking, indeed car users as well. Could you just take a step back, and in the context of the level of agreement that's been reached between the parties, both, well, I suppose in the run up to the inquiry, and some of it quite long in the tooth now, but also to the extent that the ground's narrowed during the inquiry itself, just give the inspector your overall take on, well, I suppose the relevance of that agreed material, because quite a lot of it is agreed, and then also your overall conclusions against the relevant policy tests and the framework that we've looked at already.
In terms of the level of agreement, I'd suggest that clearly the agreement with the Highways Authority is very high. We've agreed all matters with the Highway Authority in terms of access by varying modes of travel, and Mr. Hargest in evidence accepts that the provision of cycling is acceptable locally, and likewise that the bus service, minus some sort of finer elements, is of a level of service that he would expect for a development of this nature.
And so what? And so where does it take us, in your view, in terms of considering the overall scheme against the tests in policy? You know, really, what I'm asking is, to what extent would residents have the genuine choice that national policy expects? To what extent would the scheme achieve taking up appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport, given the type of development and its location? So 105 and 110 of the framework.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of paragraph, if I start with paragraph 110, appropriate opportunities have been taken up for sustainable travel modes or transport modes, and they've been relevant to the development type in terms of the quantum of units that we're looking at, and also its location. If I could just draw your attention to Annex 2 of the MPPF.
That's the glossary.
It is the glossary.
What page?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get there. It starts on page 65 of the framework, but it is page 74.
The last page of the glossary, page
Yeah.
74. Yes, we see at the top, sustainable transport modes.
Yeah.
So a defined term in the framework: any efficient, safe and accessible means of transport with overall low impact on the environment, including walking and cycling, ultra low and zero emission vehicles, car sharing and public transport. So what do you draw from that?
Well, it shows that sustainability in itself, or sustainable travel, encompasses a number of different modes of travel. It doesn't identify specifically one against another, but it says that over a range of transport modes that there needs to be sustainable, safe and accessible connections, and with this particular proposal, I believe the modes of walking and cycling and car sharing and passenger transport are met, and you can I won't dwell in terms of ultra low and zero emission vehicles, but they do also play a part.
Okay. What then about paragraph 105 in the end? Where does it boil down to, in your view, so far as our inspector making an assessment against the tests set out in that paragraph?
Well, it identifies that significant development needs to be focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable. From my judgment on it. There is the site is sustainable in that context, and where we are improving matters, we are improving matters for the wider benefit, as well as for the development, for the residents of the development itself, and it offers people a genuine choice of transport modes.
Last question on this. You've talked about the agreed position with Essex. However, we also know through the evidence that we've heard already that this is one of the sites that the local authority, that Basildon, was promoting for many years through its emerging and now withdrawn local plan exercise. We've talked about the greenbelt side of that and some of the landscape side of that too. But what relevance does all of the work that was done as part of that exercise, the emerging plan, have so far as your evidence goes, so far as locational sustainability? What has the position of Basildon been over the course of that exercise, and indeed up until the case officer's reports in our case?
Yeah, I mean, the work that supported the local plan identified, as people know, the sites across the borough for where development should be located, and this site was one of those through the evidence base that was selected, in part because of its proximity to facilities and services, and locational sustainability forms part of that.
And how was that expressed when we got through to the officers who were reviewing this application?
In terms of the...
How was the issue of locational sustainability evaluated by the officers who were considering the planning application in this case?
Yeah, so in terms of the officers, they deemed on numerous occasions that the site was locationally sustainable, and that's reported in multiple committee reports.
Has anything material in your view to that question of whether the site's locationally sustainable or not, has anything material changed since the draft plan, and also I suppose more recently since this scheme was written up for approval to members by officers of this council?
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you, madam.
Over to you, Miss Solly.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wharton. If the inspector, when she's thought about everything, agrees with Mr. Hargis and thinks he's right, that Essex County Council just didn't really think through their own guidance. Remember him saying that yesterday?
I do remember.
Yeah, I mean, if she agrees with that, then can we agree that it would reduce the weight to be given to their opinion as expressed in the statement of common ground?
I don't think you can second judge somebody who is not here and isn't sort of giving their own opinion on the matter, but that what they have agreed in the highway statement of common ground is quite clear in terms of what they believe, and I can't second guess as to whether that was a balanced judgment or whether, as Mr. Hyde just suggested, it was something else. But yeah,
that is always all we've got, isn't it? I said their opinion as expressed in the statement of common ground, didn't I? So if she agrees with Mr. Hardis, but what they're signing up to doesn't fit with their own guidance, then necessarily it might reduce the weight to be placed on.
I don't believe so. They're still employed officers of the county council who are there in their role as statutory authority, and yeah, the officers are very experienced in Essex, so they know what they're talking about. So I don't believe anything other than substantial weight should be given to the...
I'm not saying they're incompetent, but they're not, nobody's infallible, are they? Mr. Hart just said perhaps they hadn't quite thought through when they were agreeing the walking distances. It doesn't fit with their own guidance. So it's just simply, if the inspector might not agree, she might think, no, I don't agree. If she does agree, but she's not going to place the same weight on it, is she?
If I could qualify that in terms of the planning authority, sorry, the Essex County Council as highway authority have been through pre-application discussions on this site. They've reviewed the submitted planning application that went with the submission, and following all that, their recommendation was a considered recommendation to Basildon Borough. And now they've also had that time to dwell, perhaps if you say that's what you're suggesting, on the matter, and they've still agreed in a highway statement of common ground that they believe it is a locationally sustainable place, then, or development, then I think that there's only so much I can say on the matter of somebody else's.
I know, I appreciate you're not speaking for them, but we can measure what's said against what the inspector might conclude about all of those points. Now, if access to services on foot is poor, let's just say that it is, then obviously there's nothing you can do about that, is there? It just is what it is. It's not like a bus service that you can improve by running more buses at different locations. It's a matter of common sense. A distance on foot is fixed, isn't it?
The distance on foot is fixed.
And then you might be able to improve the quality of the experience. We've got points such as the pedestrian environment and safety, of course, but Mr. Hodges is right. The distance is fixed.
The distances are fixed. I didn't necessarily say that the distances were poor. They're within preferred maximum.
No, I said if. I said I'm not saying that you say if that's the conclusion. So it's a sort of common sense point. I'm not trying to catch you out, but it's obvious, isn't it? They're fixed. Okay, so we'll look at the issue of public transport, which is essentially the bus, isn't it? We're only talking about the bus, and then we'll move on to on foot. So can we agree that the existing bus provision serving the site, it's an agricultural field, but serving that area, the existing provision is abysmal, isn't it, to use a word that's come up elsewhere?
I would say along the Dunton Road corridor, it is
yes, sorry, that's what I'm referring to.
There are other, as I mentioned, there are other bus services available at High Road North and Willowfield. So yes, along the Dunton Road
one. Yeah, so three, once each way, only 3 times a week. I can't give evidence. I actually asked Mrs. Baker about the times. I'm not going to say because I can't give evidence. But anyway, we can perhaps find out from elsewhere what time the bus goes. I don't think it's anything really turns on it because we're agreeing it's not. It's not really a service. Is it? You can't use it to go to work, presumably. So, and if you only work on those particular 3 days, you can't use it to go to school. Again, you'd be, your parents would be, getting into trouble for truancy. You can't use it to go out in the evening, or really anywhere very much at all. And I think nobody we heard from on Tuesday said that they ever use it. Does that accord with what you heard too?
I don't know in terms of whether I heard anybody say that they didn't use it, but there certainly wasn't anybody
no one said
said that they did use it.
Yes.
So yeah.
I mean, if somebody must use it, or perhaps it wouldn't be there at all. Okay, so in order for the scheme to be associated with good public transport provision, obviously we need some improvements. That's the first stage. What is hoped for is the significant improvement, which is Mr. Hargis' view. That's what it would be if we do get this proposed service. We don't know for sure today if it will happen. That's fair, isn't it? It's not laid out and guaranteed. I hear what you say about it wouldn't be, but it's not clear today.
I don't think that is the case, given that, as I say, Essex are the authority that procure passenger transport, and they have the ability to speak to the operators directly. They holistically review routes. So yeah, I don't believe that is the case.
Well, they've got that ability, but we don't know today because we haven't got the information, have we? Might be reasons for that, but we don't know today that it's definitely going ahead.
Oh no, the site had the service hasn't been tendered.
Yeah,
but that's not to say that's not unusual in the situation that we're in. The tendering process comes later on down the line, and as I say, the contribution towards it is a standard approach across Essex.
Yeah, but equally, it's not unusual for an operator to have been approached and to have given an indication. Yeah, I'd be interested in running this route. Mr. Hargis isn't wrong about his experience either, then, is he?
He may not be wrong in other authority areas, but in terms of my experience in Essex, that is not the case.
He's obviously got a grave concern that after the pump priming, might not, but it could end, and we'll be back to square one. And then there wouldn't be any, if that happened, then there wouldn't be any public transport really of any use to speak of, would there, along Dunton Road? Because you've agreed that.
If that happened, but I don't believe that will happen.
No, but my question was, if that happens, I'm being fair to you. I'm not saying that's going to happen. If that happened,
if that happened, then yes, the service would revert to something akin to what's there at the moment.
Yeah. Well, presumably what is, well, who knows? And your answer to that is, well, it's obviously commercially viable because it's something the county council wants to do, and yet if it's commercially viable, then it's interesting it hasn't come forward so far. Well, have you thought about that?
Well, it's commercially viable in terms of the routes that it's looking to pick up and the facilities it's going to go to, but that it does need an element of pump priming to anchor part of the funding for it. So you'll see in the residential travel plan and the travel information packs, the part of that is to get a certain amount of passenger. There's a chicken and an egg situation of being able to actually get a route in place to then allow people to start to benefit from it, to then regularly use it.
Yes, because at the moment it's an agricultural field, so not being silly and suggesting that they would put a service in place for that. But you did mention other residents outside of the site who could use it, and that therefore you think it's commercially viable. So there's that need perhaps that you could tap into, and yet we don't have a service. So
I can't comment.
I don't expect it, but you can. Okay, so it's hourly, 6 days a week, ends at 7 o'clock. We've talked about this. It's going to be potentially difficult to use to travel to work, isn't it? Because it's in the nature of things. Someone might not know if they're going to need to stay later. They're going to need some certainty before they leave their car at home and get stuck needing to call a taxi.
Potentially, but I think that's a situation that occurs with any person who's working. You never knowing, not necessarily never knowing, but people plan their days around the bus services and the timetables that are available, or train services, or whatever means of transport they're looking at. Certainly, yeah, it does give a viability for being able to use the bus for work purposes.
But that's the point about it stopping at 7, isn't it? People aren't necessarily going to be able to say to their boss, well, I've got to plan my day around the bus time.
Well, not everybody can do that, but there are a proportion of people that are able to do that. I think COVID has taught us a lot in terms of flexible working patterns, and people can use the bus as a viable alternative to the car. And those discussions about working practices and start times and finish times have changed, I would say, over the COVID period.
Well, it's quite a global statement. Perhaps it has in some ways, perhaps it has in others. If people are working from home, then the bus service probably isn't viable. So we can go in different directions on that, but certainly it's not going to be any use in the evening, is it?
Sorry,
self-evident.
Before I answer that, can I just qualify?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Sorry, I think you conflated the COVID pandemic situation.
Well, I'm just responding to what you said.
No, sorry. What I meant by the COVID pandemic side of things, yes, there is home working, but that wasn't what I was referring to. I think working practices have evolved to some extent. Not every single person's working environment is like that, but I've experienced, and I know many other people have experienced, greater flexibility with that because people are more understanding about home life situations or things like passenger transport or their commute patterns. So yeah, that's what I was.
Then there might be in some cases, depends how progressive the employer is.
Yeah.
Okay. But then, do you disagree then that it's no use in the evening? I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? Can't.
It's not necessarily no use, but it will finish at 7 p.m. So yeah.
Well, I mean, not being pejorative, but I mean, it isn't of any use if you go out in the evening. You don't really tend to come back again at 7, do you? You go out for the evening. You can't get back at 10, 11.
No,
obviously.
Equally, the the existing bush route number 9 that is High Road North, that finishes even earlier than that. So in terms of the offering locally, actually there is a sort of a slightly enhanced duration.
Yeah, I think that takes us back to the existing provision not being very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so your table 4.1, I think you've helpfully reproduced this. It's on page 15 of your proof. Look at it if you wish. What we have 4 of the 6 bus stops that you mentioned there are over a kilometre away, aren't they?
Sorry, hang on.
Yeah, no, please do.
Sorry, what reference was it? Sorry,
yeah, page 15. It's your table 4.1 that you've reproduced.
Yep.
So 4 of the 6 are over 1 kilometre away. That's what it says.
Yep.
Okay, so obviously not very attractive when it's raining. Not that it would be to walk 400 metres either, perhaps, but it's getting a bit far in terms of encouraging people to walk and then use the bus.
Yeah, it's a sort of 12-minute walk as it says on the table.
Okay, but of course it never rains in this country, so we don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Okay. Now the stops of the new route aren't fixed, are they? Again, it says likely, so we're not completely sure.
No, but they are the stops and the locations that Essex County Council have identified and requested the contribution will go towards.
Okay. Let's go on to walking, as I think we've, in terms of overall, we've really done the bus point to a death. So walking distances, so education, and let me go also, if I may, to your proof. So I've got the table. That's me. So yeah, still on page 15. I mean, again, you've just been talking about it. So Noak Bridge, I think that has got some places, and I'm just bringing in the facilities audit at the same time at 179 places, I'm sure you recall, 2.3 kilometres, 28 minutes. I think you were agreeing really that's pushing the envelope in terms of children walking.
It's above what's preferred maximum in the IHD guidance. I'm not suggesting people wouldn't consider walking that distance, but it is, yeah.
Some people.
Some people would. Some people would.
And then, I mean, it's going to take longer with children, isn't it, than the sort of standard adult walking along?
It depends on how the child also travels. Quite often you have scooter use for children of that sort of age. My kids myself, they use scooters to get to school, and that does have a sort of a change in terms of how long you would walk. Yeah,
I think that's a fair point, actually. I mean, equally though, you might then have another child in the stroller. I mean, generally
it depends on
you'd have to bear in mind it could take a bit longer if you're going with children than if you're going by yourself. Yeah, okay. Mill House has got 27 places at the time of the facilities audit, 1.3 kilometres. And you've got Mr. Hargis's other points. James Hornsby, it's the only secondary school sort of within shooting distance, because it hasn't got any places. I know that's a different point, but it means it's slightly less relevant for us to even look at if there aren't any places, unless somebody gets in on an appeal.
Well, there's an education contribution to what I mean. I'm not here to talk about the infrastructure contribution. So, but if that's what the facilities audit says, then that's what it says. But likewise, there's contributions towards that.
It's the one appended to your evidence when it's overscribed by 42 places. Okay, community facilities. Let me just go on to page 16. Leaving aside church, community hall, sporting. So that the health centre, 2.3 kilometres, 30 minutes, probably unlikely to walk to, especially if you're already not necessarily feeling well. Which you might go if you're well and for another reason, but 30 minutes.
I mean,
it's not great. Okay. The facilities audit does say that there's a shortfall in places that will have to be dealt with in another way. Dental, we've got ASA and True Smile on your list there. 20 minutes, 26 minutes. ASA's only accepting children as NHS patients. So we need to factor in true smile as well for the adults. 2 kilometres away, 26 minutes. So we really are at the outer edges, aren't we? The preferred maximum, as you covered in chief, rather than desirable.
We're within the preferred maximum distance for those facilities.
Library, 2.2 kilometres, 29 minutes. I mean, could go for many reasons, of course, but if you're carrying several heavy books, might not be so encouraged to choose to walk there. All right, retail. So we've got the Londis, of course. Probably no disrespect to Londis, but not really for the weekly shop.
Oh, I'd agree. It's a more of a day to day.
Okay, Lidl and Asda, yes, probably likely for the weekly shop, but then given the distances, somebody probably unlikely to walk, and realistically with bags of shopping.
I think this is where you can't just focus on walking to facilities. You have to consider that there are other cycling.
Okay, so then you might have a basket. You're not going to fit very much in a basket.
Yeah, panniers. You can take things, and also .com deliveries and bus routes. So there are a range of ways to do shopping.
Not terribly attractive necessarily. Okay, employment. So we've got Hemels. Now it might be by some coincidence that somebody works there. It looks like an industrial centre to me. Is that right? I don't know if
it's an employment area of it's sort of trade counters and varying types of sort of B2, B8.
Yeah, so I mean, it is obviously entirely feasible. Somebody might work there already or get a job there, but it's not the same as town centre with a range of employment options, obviously, is it? Offices and
I think with the employment side of things, it's difficult to predict exactly where everybody is going to work from a particular location.
Yeah, it just seemed to me that it's rather unlikely that Hemels is going to be inundated with job applications. I mean, it's right, it's there, it's 18 minutes walk away, but it's just not perhaps very relevant compared to the town.
There are a lot of employers on that Hemels industrial. There's a wide range of employers on there.
All right, let's just try and put to bed this point about use of 2 meters. Sorry, not 2 meters, but I think it's 2 meters, 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers for the under 8s to walk to school before they'll pay, and 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers for 8 years plus. Now, you said very fairly that you weren't suggesting people would walk back to the primary school. So can we really just put this out of account in that case? If you're not saying that that's very realistic, do we need to rely on these figures at all?
In which figures?
Well, the Essex County using this guidance about when a local authority will have to pay for school transport.
I think it's there for context more than anything, in terms of the when the county council judge a route as being necessary to fund school transport provision. So I think it's there for context, that it's beyond 3.2 kilometres and beyond 4.8 kilometres.
What its context is when they're going to pay, isn't it? It's not really of any use to the decision the inspector's got to make about how sustainable the site is. I mean, I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but they're obviously going to push it as long as possible before they have to pay. You don't offer to pay if you're only 500 metres away. So it's just not really of any relevance to what we're really looking at.
It's DFT. It's a DFT document that Essex apply. Well, yeah.
Yes, but in that context, in the context of when they have to pay for school transport, it's not about what's a reasonable walking distance generally for a child to walk to school, is it?
No, but as I say, the schools that are identified are either within the preferred maximum distance or the cusp of it.
Yes, and that's why you fairly accepted. You're not suggesting people would walk that to the primary school, probably perhaps not to the secondary school either. All right, well, I'm not going to sort of, we can think of some absurd examples really, in terms of 5-year-old walking 2 miles each way, but I don't think we need to go there because of what we've just agreed. But those people would clearly go by car instead if they had one, suggest. Okay. I think you took Mr. Hargis's point about the overbridge, and you can't use it if you're on a mobility scooter. Just quickly, in your proof 614.616, this is the scoring where you say accessibility was scored at 197 for draft allocation H9, and you'll say, well, it was nearly good, but it is nonetheless within the limited range, isn't it? It was 197. It wasn't 200.
Yeah, it was the high end.
Yeah, call a spade a spade. Okay, there's no sort of near miss or buffer. It was just categories, isn't it? And it's not unfair to describe the accessibility as limited, is it? Given everything we've just been talking about.
I think for the you need to view the accessibility sort of in the general area. That accessibility appraisal was done for a very particular purpose, and the actual access to facilities within the Basildon area itself opens up the ability to travel to facilities and services.
Yeah, but you've got to get there first. So given everything we've just been talking about, the abysmal bus service along Dunton Road, and long distances generally on foot at the outer envelope rather than desirable or accessible, the judgment as to limited is probably right, isn't it?
I'd say for the purposes of what that document was producing, then that's what it judged there. That was the category. I mean, breaking down the methodology of it all, there's a lot of embedded links that I don't have access to, so I can't judge as to how it was scored.
But it says what it says.
It says what it says.
You referred to the pedestrian improvements. I think you referred to the pedestrian improvements as minor, and fairly speaking, they are, aren't they, in terms of this scheme?
I referred to the pedestrian improvements in relation to the junction improvements, the capacity improvements at the two junctions as more minor, but there are a number of pedestrian improvements along a number of different routes.
Are there any that you would call more than minor improvements?
I'd say providing new crossing positions on junctions with tactile paving to facilitate people being able to cross junctions is
That would be more than minor.
More than
what would that be then?
Moderate.
Moderate. Okay, well, that's a judgment call, and it really comes back to the point we agreed at the beginning in terms of the walking environment. Okay, I think that's all that I need to discuss with you. So thank you, and thank you, ma'am. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things from me. Just on the pedestrian improvements to Dunton Road, can you just, I can see the plan, but just talk me through what those changes actually are. Not within the site, actually connecting to the existing footpath, is it?
Sorry, in terms of where the site connects to the
pedestrian improvements out, so not what's going on in the site, how it connects.
So in terms of the connection point, it is providing a connection to the existing footway in the northeast corner. There's no additional measures beyond that, other than the bus stop improvements that have a relationship to the footway environment.
Okay, can you just talk me through the process that you went through with the officer at Essex County Council in terms of agreeing the statement of common ground?
It was drafted by me and issued to the officer at Essex Highways. They came back to say it was okay, and then I provided a signed copy for the officer, and the officer returned it.
Came back with any comments or?
Only to include I'd missed the bus stop upgrades on Dunton Road in the first draft that had gone to the officer.
Okay, and then one of the letters of representations raises concerns regarding the safety of the pavement width along the suggested route to Notebridge Primary School. I think they say that the pavement narrows in places and that there's no path in places. Are you aware of?
Can you point me to which of the
letter?
Yeah, is that possible? Or if not, then I can.
I think it's in their original
guess.
representation to the application.
Okay. Tell me about. I think in terms of what they're saying, I think there are constraints at points along the local highway network, as there are in most locations. I can't speak exactly as to where the representation identifies.
But on that route that you've identified, on the, I think it's figure 2, are you aware that anywhere along that route there is no pavement, or that the pavement is under the standard width?
Sorry, on which?
I think it's your figure 2, is it, that you've?
Oh, sorry, I think it was the agreed statement with in terms of walking distance.
Yeah.
That route. I think the Dunton Road footway, it probably does vary in width as you go along there. There are alternative routes that you can also take, but yeah, it's sufficient to get a person pushing a buggy, for example, or 2 people walking side by side.
Okay, that's all from me. The Rule 6 party, any questions? No. Okay,
nothing. Thank you very much.
No. Okay, thank you then. We'll have a short break then whilst Mr. Wharton removes himself and we get Mr.
Fisher.
Mr.
Is it worth just taking stock on to what we might reasonably expect to achieve?
Yes. Yeah.
Today? Mr. Fisher might be, say, 45 minutes and achieve something like that. So that would take us to 3:15 if we had 15 minutes now, something along those lines. I don't know where Mr. Ollie. Oh, what's going on? Sorry, it's long day. I don't know where Ms. Ollie is in terms of her timings.
I haven't got very much from Mr. Fisher. Obviously, I've got some questions, but just to explain, I don't tend to put judgments to witnesses. I don't think it really helps you. If you disagree, then I will. But
yeah.
So I think we'll probably finish from my point of view on that basis.
from the 4:30.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
and I'd be embarrassed if we didn't quite finish, then only had 5 minutes tomorrow, but either way, we'd be coming back, so,
Okay.
but I think I will finish.
Would they anticipate, if that did happen, just a thought on timetabling, I suppose? I mean, it might just be that tomorrow then is a non-sitting day and that's that. But obviously, if we probably, I think highways are now coming along to the 106 session, so it might not be possible to bring 106 session forward. Even if you wanted to, madam, which you might not, you might not actually prepare for it all. So there's probably not too much we can do, other than I suppose we could bring the site visit
Could do a
forward.
site visit, yeah.
We could have conditions if you wanted to, or we could leave that for next week. Yeah, so different options.
Okay, I'll have a think about it over the break and come back to you. Okay, so we'll break now until 2:30. So the inquiry is adjourned. Thank you. Okay, it's 2:30 and inquiries resumed. Just before we start with Mr. Fisher, so I've had a think about what my preferred route for the next few days would be that assuming we don't finish with Mr. Fisher today because of the 4:30 finish, but if we do, then great, is if we can do the 106 and the conditions tomorrow morning. I know that somebody from Essex County Council wants to dial into that.
Right.
And I don't know if they're able to do that.
The council's solicitor doing that, Ms. Hock, she's not actually here tomorrow.
Right.
So she wouldn't be able to do the section 106 tomorrow. Yeah, we don't have anyone to field tomorrow. Obviously next week we do.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, that's that then. So we'll do the conditions.
We'll do conditions tomorrow then.
And we'll do the site visit then.
Yeah, we'll work. I understand. Is this right? That Mr. Hargest is working on a route for the site visit overnight. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, we've started discussions about how much needs to be covered.
Okay, well, rest
yeah.
assured I've done quite a lot already. So when you say you're planning a route, what I'm expecting to do is the visit, is the actual access to the site.
Right. So in terms of wider area, we should leave that to you.
Yeah, I've done
That's
that.
really helpful.
Yeah.
That should be quite straightforward.
Okay.
I think we were planning something more elaborate, but
Yeah.
we don't need to do that now. All right.
So, and then on Tuesday then,
Leave
the 106, and then are you content to do your closings then after that?
I say yeah, we would be, yeah. So that would leave, yeah. So then we'd be closing on Tuesday altogether.
Yeah.
Which is fine by us, if it works for you, madam. So we do conditions and site visit tomorrow, 106, and closings on Tuesday. Yeah, I think that probably works, however long Mr. Fisher takes now, but anyway, but hopefully we can finish him this afternoon.
Okay, who's intending to come on the site visit?
It'll just be Mr. Child on our side. That'll be tomorrow after conditions. So we'll go, is the idea here first for conditions and then
Yes.
site visit after?
Yeah. Is somebody attending the site visit from the Rule 6 party? Yeah. And who from the council?
Mr. Reynolds. Oh, and Mr. Hargest. Sorry, you were saying it was
We've assumed, I should say, madam, that for the purposes of the site visit, that it's going to be. Well, I'm not offering. Well, we can come if you'd like, but I wasn't suggesting Mr. Wharton go along because I'd assumed that things like what the walking routes he's been through and all of that. It'll be more a focus on the site itself that you'll be doing tomorrow.
Just to reiterate, there isn't any discussion about anything on the site
yeah.
visit. It's purely me
Pointing
getting
things
access
out
to the site.
Fine. All right. Yeah. So it'll just be Mr. Child.
Okay, so that'll then 5 total. Okay. Right, that's fine with me then. Do you want to give me the document references?
Are there any? Is the question. There's not much, madam. Let me just have a quick flip. I suspect. There's really not much. I think it might just be a question of just, I mean, most of it's just going to be reflecting on things that you've heard, I think, rather than lots of documents. So perhaps we'll just, I'm sure I've missed something, but we can pick it up when we get there. That's it, if that's all right.
Okay, yeah, I'll just get your proof.
Yes, of course, there's
yeah.
the proof. Yes, Mr. Fisher's proof.
And somebody's getting the documents uploaded, are they? They have, right, thank you. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Fisher. You've prepared, do you want to turn your microphone on? You've prepared a proof of evidence where you tell us on the second page that you're Andrew Fisher, a town planner employed by Stantec, membership of the RTPI, and also an academy. I'm not going to be able to do this. Academy of the Academy of Urbanism. Your 25 years experience in public and private sectors. In the past, indeed, you were at Northampton and also the East of England Development Agency before you moved into private practice. And you're familiar with this site and the key documents relating to the case. Is all of that correct?
It is, yes.
Just give the inspector a flavour of when it was that you personally came to be involved with the project.
So I first got involved about 5 years ago, but our company has been involved since 2013.
I'll ask you in a moment about a little bit more of the chronology of Stantec, or as it is now, Barton Wilmore, as was involvement with the project. Now, before I ask you to reflect on the key matters of disagreement and why you say what you say about them, the first thing I want to go over with you and ask you to help the inspector with is where, over the course of the week so far, you see matters narrowing as between you and Mr. Hargest. Are there any issues where you see agreement having emerged, or key issues sort of coming together between you and him?
Yes, I think there are a number of those that have emerged over the last couple of
Talk
days.
us through what the matters of agreement are that you consider now to have emerged.
That's fine. So I think if we take them by topic order, in relation to the development plan, Mr. Hargest has agreed that the development is in accordance with the development plan as taken as a whole. He has agreed with us that the development plan is out of date, that the plan was not prepared to foresee growth beyond 2001, and that the basis and needs on which it is built are completely out of date, as are the policies. He also accepted that sorry, forgive me.
Slow down slightly. Sorry, just repeat what you said about the development plan. The second bit.
He agreed that the development plan is out of date and that the plan was not prepared to foresee growth beyond 2001. In relation to that, that the basis and needs on which it is built are also completely out of date. And finally, on the development plan, Mr. Hargest accepted that the definition of the Greenbelt boundaries in that plan were drawn up on historic evidence and need up to 2001, and that those boundaries have not been amended since and are out of date.
What about the status of the emerging local plan evidence base, something the inspector touched on earlier on in questions to Mr. Dadds? What's the agreed position there?
I think the agreed position from Mr. Hargest now is that the evidence base weighs heavily in favour of the application and the development, and reflects the position that the Kennel Lane inspector found, and also the obviously in particular the Greenbelt topic paper weighs in our favour.
I think the fair caveat would be Mr. Hargest did not consider that the evidence base for the Kennel Lane scheme was the same as the evidence base for this scheme, but he didn't endorse the issue of the approach that inspector took. Okay, so far as the reasons for refusal go, as they were, has any ground narrowed in that respect?
It has indeed, yes. So Mr. Hargest has now agreed that there is no conflict with either of the development plan policies cited in the first reason for refusal, Mum. Those being BAS GB1 and BE12. In relation to GB1, Mr. Hargest agreed with us that GB1 set the boundaries, but that without GB2, it didn't define what could happen in the Greenbelt. And that is then left to national policy in the form of the And in relation to BE12, he accepted that character in this policy was not related to openness and greenbelt. And again, reflected that similar conclusions had been drawn in principle by the inspectors at the Kennel Lane and Maitland Lodge appeals.
So having said originally that BE12 was a greenbelt policy, he reflected after I showed him the Kennel Lane and Maitland Lodge appeals that it wasn't, and withdrew his objection in respect of that policy.
Agreed, yes.
Okay. Anything else on the reasons for refusal?
Yes, he accepted that there are no character and appearance or design reasons for refusal, and it is not part of the council's case. He further accepted in the reasons for refusal that there is nothing in those reasons for refusal that refer to any of the transport policies in the National Planning Policy Framework.
Yes.
And finally, he accepted that the evidence in support of the emerging local plan has weight, and that this has determined that greenbelt land would be necessary to meet housing needs, and that no contrary evidence has been prepared for this inquiry or anywhere else that changes that position.
You've touched on the failure to allege any conflict with any national transport policies or the transport policies in the framework. Anything else so far as transport goes?
Yes, Mr. Hargest has accepted that improvements to bus services wasn't given weight in his proof, and he recognises now that the bus route is a benefit to a wider community than just the proposed development.
So far as housing needs go, what was your reflections on the ground narrowing between the parties?
Well, there was quite a lot of discussion on the wording in relation to housing need. I think the wording that Mr. Hargest finally fell upon was very concerning, but he did also accept that the wording that had been used by the inspectors in terms of abysmal, acute.
He didn't accept.
Sorry, forgive me. Abysmal, acute, persistent, extremely serious, and bleak was not inconsistent with his view. He also accepted that the conclusions regarding overall market and affordable housing need and delivery in this appeal are directly comparable to both the Kennel Lane and Maitland Lodge appeals.
What about the future? The ability of the position to be addressed through a new local plan exercise. What did Mr. Hargest say about that, to the extent you agree with him?
I think we are in agreement. Mr. Hargest accepted that we don't know when a new local plan is actually going to be adopted. I think we agree that it's likely to be at least 4 years. I think we also agree, and Mr. Hargest has stated that he has no alternative proposition for bringing forward housing in that context other than through local approvals or the appeal process. Mr. Hargest also agreed that the evidence in support of the draft local plan demonstrates that in meeting future housing needs, some development in the Greenbelt is inevitable, and that housing needs cannot be met solely on brownfield land.
So far as the overriding objectives in the framework go, what's your view on the extent to which you agree with Mr. Hargest now on whether those are being met in Basildon?
I think we've now reached agreement that, and Mr. Hargest has accepted that of the objectives in the PPF, at least 2 of those are being failed in Basildon. Those being paragraph 8b, ensuring sufficient range and number of homes, and paragraph 15, the planning system should be plan-led.
So far as locational sustainability goes, obviously we've just heard quite a lot about that from the appellant side of the fence, but Mr. Hargest also gave lots of evidence on it. You've mentioned some of the topics already, but is there anything else that where you see matters having come together?
Yes, I think Mr. Hargest has now recognised that in terms of the local plan position, Basildon, including Langdon, is the most sustainable settlement location in the settlement hierarchy. And that there are significant jobs within the A127 enterprise corridor, and obviously in proximity to the town centre. He also recognised that there is no alleged conflict from the council with Chapter 9 of the NPPF. He agreed that the NPPF paragraphs 104, 105 and 1110 are the key tests, and that in terms of paragraph 111, there are no issues between us. He confirmed that there is no objection on the basis of cycling. On matters of public transport, Mr. Hargest Proof said that this could be addressed. Draft section 106 is now in place. Mr. Hargest confirms that he's happy with the route plan for the public transport improvements as set out in the Statement of Common Ground with Essex, and that this would result in a substantial improvement. Although, in fairness to Mr. Hargest, he did still have issues with the frequency and timing of that service, which was discussed by Mr. Wharton just a moment ago. Mr. Hargest agreed that there is no current national policy on acceptable walking times. He also agreed that the preferred maximums in terms of walking distances are up to 2 kilometres, and that many of the local facilities would be within those preferred maximums. And finally, on that topic, Mr. Hargest agreed that there will be a choice of modes of travel available in line with NPPF Para 105, and that opportunities to pursue walking, cycling and public transport have been identified and pursued in accordance with Para 104C of the NPPF.
To be clear, I think he agreed there was a choice, but what he questioned was whether it, well, the extent to which it was a genuine choice.
Indeed.
All right. There's the issue for the inspector to decide. And then so finally on the planning balance, Mr. Hargest updated his evidence orally. What's your position on the, I mean, how much water is there between you two now so far as the overall planning balance goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Hargest accepted that if it is correct that Mr. Lewis Reynolds' evidence that the remaining greenbelt beyond the site would continue to function in its purposes and that the impacts would be localised, then he would have to reconsider his planning balance, which was already finally balanced, to conclude that the benefits of the scheme would outweigh the harms.
Although not clearly.
Although not clearly.
And so where we are on that approach is that you're saying clearly outweigh and he says outweigh, and so the inspector's got to decide between those two positions.
Quite right, yes.
Okay, I'll ask you then about your position. Firstly, you've alluded to the history, your involvement a few years old, but your company's involvement longer than that. At a very high level, could you just give the inspector a flavour for how you and indeed your client have engaged with the council to get to the situation that we're in today, including, of course, to get to the stage of having been a draft allocation in the plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the landowner and more recently Gore have been committed to bringing forward this site through the local plan process, and it's only a failure of that process that's led us to this appeal position. The site was originally included in the call for sites in 2008. It was then promoted in 2013-14 through the HELAR. Site visits were undertaken in 2015. In 2016, submissions were made to the local plan consultation on new sites and alternative sites. In 2018, representations were made to the pre-submission draft local plan. 2019, obviously the draft plan was submitted to Secretary of State. And in 2020, we signed a PPA with Basildon Borough Council. And in July of that year, the planning application for the scheme was submitted. Critically, that application was submitted after the allocation of the local plan and the submission. So following a plan-led approach in that context. And even after that, we've continued to engage with the local plan. And so in January 2022, have continued to make submissions. So I think it's a picture of Blore and the landowner pursuing a plan-led approach as far as possible to the delivery of this site over an extended period.
That's the history. Let's get on to the planning exercise now before this inspector. So if I could ask you briefly, please, just to summarise the approach that you take to the statutory development plan. We all know that remains the starting point so far as section 38.6 goes, even if it's a little long in the tooth. What's your approach to accordance and weight so far as the statutory development plan goes?
So it is my view, it's in my proof, that the appeal scheme complies with the development plan when read as a whole. And that's the same conclusion that is reached in the officer's report, core document 3.1, para 6.4. However, given the age of the development plan policies, which were prepared in the 1990s and adopted in 1998, is my view that the policies in the development plan, notwithstanding the fact that we accord with them, should be afforded little weight, given that they were based on housing figures and evidence set many years ago.
Thank you. Other material considerations then, which is everything else. The framework, what is your view, what in your view is the critical test in terms of the development management test that the inspector has to apply in order to reach an appropriate view of whether the scheme is supported by the framework? Yeah,
and I think we're at a point where the critical test here and the key determinative test for the appeal is obviously paragraphs 147, 148 of the framework and the NPPF, and whether or not the potential harm to the greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations.
Is all the harm clearly outweighed by other considerations? So a balance to be struck. How do you go about striking that balance? If we start with the harms side of the equation, and then we'll do the benefit side of the equation and reach your overall view. So on the harms side, what do you put onto the harm side of the scales, and what weight do you attribute to those things?
Well, first and foremost, obviously the greenbelt and the landscape effects. Mr. Chard's evidence assesses the contribution of the appeal site to the purposes of the greenbelt, including the listed purposes as set out in the framework, and also matters of openness. He also addresses the landscape impacts, and I adopt the conclusions of Mr. Chard in that regard.
Do you adopt Mr. Chard's conclusions, and how should those things be weighted on the scales?
I accept that there will be some limited harm to the greenbelt as a result of the development, and that the tests relating to the purposes of openness mean that has to be afforded substantial weight. Matters relating to landscape features, character and visual effects, I afford moderate weight.
Okay, so we've got substantial weight to the extent of harm that Mr. Chard identifies as far as greenbelt matters go, moderate weight to more general landscape visual matters. What about this issue of the loss of agricultural land, which is something that Mr. Hargest told us about yesterday?
Indeed, but also something that Mr. Hargest identified that he hadn't identified in his proof of evidence. So I think he did with it in verbally, but
Yeah.
The land obviously there will inevitably be a loss of agricultural land as a result of the development. The land has been assessed as mostly subgrade 3A with some subgrade 3B, and obviously paragraph 174B of the framework advises that planning decisions should recognise the benefits of the best and most versatile agricultural land. The council concluded in their committee report at 5.16.1 that the loss of moderate to good quality agricultural land will necessarily result from the proposed development and weighs moderately against the proposals. However, that is balanced in the context of paragraph 122 of the framework, which advises that planning decisions need to reflect changes in the demand for land, and applications for alternative uses should be supported where the proposed use would contribute to meeting an unmet need for development in the area. And in the light of that, I conclude that the loss of agricultural land is a moderate harm to which I afforded limited weight.
So far as the other considerations go in your planning scale, your 148 balance, or AKA the benefits associated with the scheme, how do you give weight to those? If I ask you first about the scheme's delivery of market housing, how should the inspector, in your view, approach that consideration so far as how much weight she gives it as a matter that weighs in the balance? Yeah,
I mean, it's common ground between us that the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, contrary to paragraph 74 of the framework. The housing land supply evidence appended to my proof of evidence prepared by Ben Pycroft Emery Planning identifies a different figure from the council. I don't think we wanted to debate that particularly. I think the statement of common ground says it's up to 1.85 years, and I think we are perfectly content with that as a position. The government's 2021 housing delivery test figures confirm a delivery rate in Basildon of just 41%. Footnote of the 8 of the framework identifies that even a delivery rate of 75% should be considered substantially below the requirement. And as demonstrated by Mr. Pycroft in his appendix to my proof, the annual housing completions in Basildon have averaged 435 dwellings per annum against a local housing need of 1,043 per annum. The housing delivery test scores in Basildon have fallen annually since 2018, and the housing delivery test in Basildon is now the 7th lowest in the country. In the context of all of that, it is my view that the council is failing in its duty to plan for sufficient homes to meet the needs of those in the borough. And the weight given to the delivery of market housing must be determined in the context of the agreed substantial housing land supply shortfall and extremely poor housing delivery test results, and the fact that the council do not expect to have a new local plan in place until 2027 at the earliest. And in that context, I would view that that should be given very substantial weight.
Thank you. Affordable housing. How should the inspector approach the scheme's delivery of affordable housing as a matter to be weighed in the balance?
Again, the evidence prepared by James Stacey of Tetlow King gives a very clear portrayal of the situation in Basildon with regard to the provision of affordable housing. Mr. Stacey's evidence shows the situation is desperate, persistent and dramatic undersupply of affordable housing in the borough. In 2021-22, he identifies there's been a shortfall of 379 homes against a target of 521 new affordable homes. And he identifies that the council's future supply for the next 5 years is a projected figure of just 60 affordable homes per annum against the most recent assessment in the South Essex Housing Needs Assessment 2022 for 521 affordable homes per annum between 2021 and 2039-40. On the basis that the development will provide 40% affordable housing, which is a significant increase relative to the Safe Development Plan policy, but critically also exceeds the requirements of the Basildon Borough Council obligation strategy supplementary planning document 2015, which seeks 36% affordable housing. And having regard to the national policy and the dire situation as set out, there is clearly a pervasive need for affordable housing in the borough. And it is my opinion that substantial weight must be afforded to the provision of each affordable home delivered in Basildon through the proposals, to the conclusions of the inspector in the Maitland Lodge appeal, core document 6.2.
Worth just picking up on when you say one of the things you said is significantly above existing policy. I appreciate the existing policy is a bit old, but are you able to help us with what the existing policy target actually is? Is policy, I think it's BAS S5 in the, which you can access in the original 8.19 or core document 8.19, or indeed the saved version of the plan.
What's the core document reference?
So if you turn to, I've got it in the original, but the inspector may have. Thank you. 4.3 is the save. I've got the original, which is 8.19. Either way.
Sorry, it's just taking a moment. And the reference, sorry.
BAS S5.
Is there a page number you're taking me to?
Yeah.
BASS3.
Scroll down,
Yeah,
you'll get there.
We're there.
BAS S5 affordable housing.
Yep.
There's a few paragraphs worth of text, but I think that hopefully you've got the same as me. The third paragraph begins the scale and form of provision.
Yes, sorry, forgive me, between 15 and 30% of the
Right.
total number of units.
Okay. Sorry to take you off out of order. I just want
No,
to
that's
show the
fine.
inspector what the existing requirement actually is. So what's the relevance then of that existing requirement when the inspector comes to judge the weight to be attributed to the 40% provision on offer here?
Well, we significantly exceed it.
Thank you. Now, you've given your overall conclusion then on the weight to be attributed to affordable housing is as per Mr. Stacey's evidence and indeed your own.
Indeed, substantial weight.
I think actually you and he said, and I think you've repeated this in your proof. Maybe nothing turns on it. Let me just make sure. Yeah, you've said at 4.4.79, you've said very substantial weight, but it might be that nothing turns on that.
Very substantial weight, yeah, forgive me, sir.
All right. Other benefits, you identify a number of other ones in your written proof. I don't need to spend too long going through them now, but if you could just tell the inspector at a high level what they are and in respect of each one, what weight you give them, why.
Yes, so first and foremost, I suppose, building a strong competitive economy and the economic benefits attributed to this scheme. I've appended an economic benefit statement to my main proof, which demonstrates benefits both during the construction phase and post-completion of the development in terms of the contribution to the local economy and employment, and I afford those economic benefits significant weight. In terms of biodiversity net gain, submitted biodiversity net gain evidence demonstrates a significant biodiversity net gain is possible on the site with a range of enhancements, and the appeal scheme includes the enhancement of biodiversity areas and planting across the site. I attribute significant weight to the biodiversity net gain, and I would just highlight in relation to that I know Mr. Hargis was making the point that the current requirement for biodiversity net gain is 10%. I don't think that it is. The MPPF only requires a net gain, and therefore our net gain is substantially beyond the current policy requirements. The next benefit is the ability to deliver high quality design in line with paragraph 126 of the framework. As I said, we've been through a PPA process of design with the council and reflecting the requirements of the Essex Design Guide, and in compliance with chapters 8 and 12 of the framework. I attach moderate weight to that as a benefit. The next benefit is accessible open space. The scheme provides 3 areas of accessible green space within the development itself. But critically, there is also a contribution towards off-site improvements to be captured through the Section 106 agreement locally to the site, in the context of the access to the on-site facilities and also the improvement to local community facilities. Identify that there will be a moderate weight attached to those benefits. Sustainable building measures. Paragraph 7 of the NPPF confirms the purpose of the planning system to contribute to the achievability of sustainable development. Sustainable benefits have been incorporated, including EV design, EV charging, the provision of efficient homes, and no gas development. And again, just in relation to something that Mr. Hargis said the other day in terms of standards that will be coming in, well, those standards don't exist currently until 2025, as I understand it, and so therefore this again is a benefit that I attribute to the scheme, and I attribute moderate weight to. In terms of a sustainable transport, the issue of whether or not the site can be considered a sustainable location for development. Paragraph 104 of the framework requires opportunities to promote walking and cycling. Paragraph 105 goes on to confirm where locations could be sustainable. I adopt the position of Mr. Wharton from Ardent in relation to that and the benefits that accrue, and I give moderate weight to the sustainable transport benefits of the scheme. And then, yeah, I think that's it on benefits.
Thank you. A particular issue about the sufficiency of, rather than just the accessibility to, but the sufficiency of existing services, infrastructure, facilities to meet the additional demands that will be placed on those services by new people arriving as a consequence of the inspector deciding to grant permission. What's your view on the position there?
Yeah, I think just wanted to be clear on this one, really, I suppose, and noting Mr. Hargis's evidence, paragraph 4.1, the reason for refusal 3 only refers to the accessibility of the site in terms of sustainable transport modes, and not whether or not there are sufficient services to meet the additional need and demand. And I agree with that position. The local services audit was prepared and submitted as part of the planning application. That's been updated for the purposes of the appeal and forms an appendix to the proof of Mr. Wharton. And that identifies a range of community facilities that exist locally within a 5-kilometre distance. A Section 106 legal agreement has been progressed, which captures the requirements identified in the statutory consultation process. And there's no suggestion from the council or the Ward 6 party that these contributions would be in any way deficient in meeting the requirements of the development. And indeed, in Mr. Hargis's evidence, he concludes at para 4.11 that he considers that the above conditions would address the additional need for services, facilities and infrastructure arising from the proposed development.
So how then, taking a step back and considering the overall test now to be struck, it's been through several of the harms, several of the benefits, you've identified the critical test, do the benefits clearly outweigh the harms or not? How then do you say that the inspector should navigate that ultimate balancing exercise?
Well, first, I think I'd just reiterate, it's my view that the appeal scheme complies with the development plan as well as a whole, which is the same conclusion as is reached in the officer's report. Notwithstanding the above conclusion, even if the view were to be taken that there was a conflict with the development plan, the weight given to that conflict must be minimal given the significant outdatedness of that plan. And in those circumstances, when other material considerations are taken into account, it's my view that the benefits of the scheme would clearly outweigh the harms caused. And according to 148 of the framework, that would mean that very special circumstances exist to justify the grant of planning permission. I acknowledge the fundamental aim of Greenbelt and in the appropriateness of development within it, and that is by definition harmful. However, I believe that is clearly outweighed by the considerations which give rise to those very special circumstances. That view is shared by Basildon Borough Council officers in 2 separate reports to committee, and that those benefits can be achieved on a site which is demonstrably sustainable. The committee report found that the pedestrian access to the application site could be improved. We've been through various evidence with Mr. Wharton to that effect, and that is further confirmed through the statement of common ground with the with Essex Highways Authority. I conclude that the benefits of the appeal scheme would deliver are very substantial. The need for the scheme in delivering new market and affordable housing is compelling, and that those benefits outweigh the localised harm to the Greenbelt as provided to us by Mr. Chard in his evidence, both in his proof and orally.
Mr. Fisher, thank you very much. Those are the questions, Ben.
Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Ollie.
Thank you, ma'am. I've got a bit of an issue to start with. Let's go back to the beginning of my notes. I do it in different ways. I could just take Mr. Fisher through. I don't want to be sort of necessarily too combative about it, but he started by quite helpfully going through the ways in which the position between him and Mr. Hargis has been narrowed. But I strongly disagree with some of the alleged agreements. I'm going to have to go back to my notes, and I can and will do that in closing. In some ways, it's helpful to know now what the other side thinks the agreements are, rather than just sort of finding out at the end of the proceedings when the appellant's got the last word. But we're a bit disturbed by some of the things that it said Mr. Hargis agreed to, and some of them weren't points that were put to him. So how could we perhaps deal with that best?
I think I would, from my perspective, I'd prefer you to go through it now rather than just having a statement saying we disagree.
Yes, I'll do my best then to go through it. It's just that I can't back it up until I go back through my notes, but perhaps you'll agree with me that, I mean, there may be that there's been some interpretation going on, but I just wanted to flag that before I start. Thank you. Well, good afternoon then, Mr. Fisher. So
Good afternoon.
In line with that, one of the things you said was that Mr. Hargis agreed that the evidence base weighs heavily in favour of the application and the development. He didn't, did he?
Well, according to my notes, this is going to be the problem, I fear.
Well, yes.
According to my notes, that is something that was agreed, but
I think on my note, if this helps, I hope you don't mind me. I'm trying to sort of. I think my note of what was said is that he agreed that the evidence base should be attributed significant weight. He did not agree that it should be attributed significant weight in favour of the scheme, because he thought that the evidence base wasn't as supportive in this case as it was for the Kennel Lane scheme. That was what I took away.
That's very helpful, because that's what I've got.
That's what we'll be closing on the basis.
Are you all right with that, Mr. Fisher?
of course.
Okay, yeah. All right. Okay. Let's just see if there are any others we can iron out. Then in relation to the overriding objectives in the framework, you said Mr. Hargis agreed at least 2 of those were being failed in Basildon, 8 having enough homes, and
8B and 15.
15, yeah, and it should be planning. No, I would neither of us recall that being specifically put.
Specifically put both of them. I mean, you know, I've got written down the question, written down the answer.
But that's fine. No, I'll check my notes. Just sure. I just didn't think it'd been put. We'll leave that one aside then, and I can let Mr. Simons know so he can still put it in his closing. Points about the planning balance. I think Mr. Simons picked that up, to be fair to him. Okay. Agricultural land. It wasn't something Mr. Hargis told us about yesterday, was it? It was actually, it's been in your proof all along. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So just, there's only a very small point there. Okay. And the point about BASS 5 arising out of what you've just been saying, it's also out of date, isn't it? Given all that's been said about how old the local plan is.
Yes.
So just as a small point, as a nuance, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We'd need to see the over provision in that context.
Yes, I mean that is still the extant policy. Whether it's in date or not is probably matter for debate. I think it'd be quite hard for me to argue that policy is in date, having argued that others are not.
Absolutely.
Hence why I've also referenced the SPD to be fair about it, I suppose, in terms of how I'm presenting that point.
Yeah, because I mean 40% is quite in line with most modern up-to-date policies, isn't it? 40% affordable housing provision.
Well, possibly, but those policies don't exist in Basildon, so.
No, I mean, I'm not criticising the affordable housing for one moment. I'm not saying it's, it's not a good level of provision. That's obviously not part of our case, but I just want to be equal in terms of our treatment of the policies. If the plan's really ancient, then
I
understand
the point you're making.
Okay.
I suppose what my point is, that's why, in addition to the policy in my proof, I also referenced the SPD, which does identify a higher level. So I'm trying to be fair, I suppose, in what I'm saying there.
Okay.
Sorry to intervene.
Yes.
Is the SPD in the core documents?
Don't know is the short answer.
No, I don't think it is either.
Shall I put it in?
Your reference.
So and it's been referred to, so it probably should. What year was the SPD? Might have to.
In 2015, I think, according to my proof.
Are you content for that to be added, Miss Ollie?
Policy compliance. I think it's opening a bit of a can of worms, to be honest. I mean, maybe given that it's affordable housing isn't one of the reasons for refusal, we don't need to worry about it too much.
That in the report.
I was going to say to you, Mr. Fisher, Mr. Hargis obviously made a concession about a local plan policy. So we don't need to deal with that. There's nothing between us on the application of the NPPF, I don't think. And you've agreed quite correctly, substantial weight to the harm to the green belt goes into the balance because that's attracted by any harm to the green belt. Got a disagreement between us as to how much harm there is, but we've certainly got some. If the inspector in the event agrees with Mr. Hargis on the locational sustainability points, then it would be right to put substantial weight in the balance against the developments on that issue, wouldn't it? If she agrees, she may not.
Yeah, it was a hypothetical question, I suppose, isn't it?
And I know if she agrees in terms of weight.
As you know, we disagree on that, and we'll continue to do so. I suppose hypothetically, that would be the case.
Okay, and I understand that you disagree, but did you change your mind at all after hearing Mr. Hargis elaborate on that? Did it move the needle at all for you?
No.
Sorry, did you say no?
No.
Oh, right, not at all. Even though he
no,
all the points he made about walking distances.
No,
and
I stand by the evidence of Mr. Wharton on that.
All right. As I said, I'm not going to argue the planning balance with you because it's a matter of judgment for the inspector. She's got both sides cases. I don't think that's going to achieve anything. But I do want to just look at the weight that you've given to, having said that, to the economic benefits, because and I don't want to go into anything technical, but there's just a couple of points I think we do need to be clear about in your appendix 2. And bearing in mind, Mr. Hargis has said something about it in his appendix H, so we might want to just have his proof to hand, and that is
Mr. Hargis.
Mr. Hargis, that's 10.6.
I'm so sorry. Where are we going now?
Mr. Hargis proof.
Well, I want him to have Mr. Hargis proof to hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Paragraph
and,
10.6, did you say?
It's 10.6, that's the CD number, so everyone can look
sorry.
it up on the screen, in case they haven't. But his appendix H is right down at the very end, the last page, 43. Anyway, we'll come to it. So appendix 2, you've got an economic benefits statement. It's got to be put in the context of the local economy, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, the premise of it is that the direct benefits will predominantly serve the Basildon area, as I read it. 2.5 of it. PDF 67, I think. It's internal page 3, PDF 67. 2.5 is considered the direct economic benefits.
Yes, although there will be some indirect benefits
And some
as well.
indirect benefits, felt wider.
Yes.
Field, to say predominantly. So you've got to look at the impacts in context. Obviously, economic impacts are going to be more significant in a weak local economy than a strong one.
Potentially, yes.
You've got high unemployment, low activity rates, then economic impacts are going to have a greater resonance.
Yes.
Okay. So if you've not got much unemployment in an area, or the construction industry is at full capacity locally, then you'd need to import labour and materials, service and development. It wouldn't be sort of helping the local economy as such, because they would be maxed out.
So you repeat that for me, please?
If there's not much unemployment in the area in question,
Yes.
or let's just say the local construction industry is absolutely maxed out, you're at full capacity, then you would have to import your labour and materials to service the development, wouldn't you?
Potentially, yes, depending on how much capacity there was within that.
Okay, so that'd be relevant to assumptions made about displacement and leakage. We've got that 4.8 in the document.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not my document, so but I rely.
No,
on
I
it.
do understand that. That's why I'm not trying to go into drill down too much, but it doesn't seem to me that the statement takes into account either of those points. It doesn't seem to put it in context, and it doesn't seem to consider that.
Again, it's not my document. I rely upon it, so it's quite hard for me to comment on the detail of it.
Well, all right, it's obviously in your appended to your proof. Construction benefits, I just want to be clear what that means at 4.3, which is PDF 73. And 4.4. So it's estimated the development could support 69 direct construction jobs over the construction period. So it doesn't go, it says what it says, just 69
Yes.
jobs over the construction period. It's not a long-term permanent benefit. Okay. Then table 4.1 on page 10 or 74 PDF, I've got 12 design jobs. I've got 21 management jobs, 36 full-time operatives. I think actually it's 37. I've checked a couple of times, perhaps doesn't really matter. No floorers, interestingly, but I'm sure that's covered. I'm sure there'll be some floors. Does that seem a little bit unrealistic? It seems quite management heavy.
There's been no evidence from the council about this. I mean, at this level of detail, a bit management heavy. I mean, this is the first time we're hearing.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's there, and I'm just making
No,
a
it's
very,
there, but Mr.
a
Hard
very
just hasn't
basic
rebutted it. We've heard
point.
nothing about it. The council's
And-
finished its evidence.
and
Where's this coming
Mr.
from?
Fisher's according moderate weight to it in the balance, and I think I'm entitled to test what it says. I'm just, these are my own points. I'm not employing any specialist technical expertise. I think they're fair points in my submission.
The question's relevant in terms of the weight that
Okay.
you're attaching to economic benefits. So if you just answer as best you can.
Could you repeat the question, please, on that basis?
Well,
Thank you.
you've got 21 design jobs.
But is it
21
management heavy,
management. So
is the
it
question?
just seems a bit management heavy to me as a layperson.
Well,
You're the expert, so what do you think?
I'm not the economic benefits expert. I didn't write the report, so I'm the planner relying upon the evidence of somebody else.
Unfortunate. Okay, well, do your best then.
So I don't know whether that's
You don't know.
management heavy or
Okay,
not. No.
all right. But logically, unless you're using a lot of prefab or offsite construction and automation, I mean, we haven't got any suggestion of that, have we? Okay, well, let's look at table 4.2. Just further down, PDF 76 or page 12.
Mhm.
So gross job creation 69, which is what we've just looked at, the construction phase. Net direct employment for residents of the Basildon Borough Council area, 32. So it's just under 50%. We don't see how that's been assessed, do we?
Not in this table, no.
No. Now this is when we look at Mr. Hargis's Appendix H. So the economic activity of Basildon. If you look at that, employment and unemployment 2022 to 2023. Got Basildon compared to the East and compared to Great Britain as a whole. It's got a very high activity rate and low unemployment rate, hasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So on that basis, with that relatively high employment rate, wouldn't it be a bit optimistic to suggest, as the statement does, that half of the employment is going to be retained in the Basildon area? It's probably going to be a bit less than that, isn't it, in that context?
Well, it's not a huge number, is it, in the total? Talking about what, 30 jobs? Doesn't seem a huge leap.
Well, that might be also a relevant point, that it's not a huge number, but I mean they're only temporary, aren't they? It's just the course of the construction. I mean, the reason I'm asking is that we don't normally see a lot of weight attributed to economic benefits when it's just construction. That's fair, isn't it? We generally see in the balance it's put a bit lower than that. It's a benefit, but it's limited.
Sorry, but the report doesn't just identify construction benefits, does it? It identifies economic benefits beyond that as well.
Yes, I mean at 415.
So we're not basing the weight just on construction benefits. We're basing the weight on economic benefits as a whole.
Okay, so 415, just before the paragraph numbering goes a bit awry. So 415, PDF 77, net employment effect likely to generate GVA of 4.4 million per annum. I think Mr. Hargis did say that's a bit of a drop in the ocean in the context of the size of the Basildon economy. Not a huge amount, is it?
Well, I would say that is a substantial contribution to the local economy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the development, I mean, this is an obvious point, it doesn't employ people, does it? It's housing.
Agreed.
Yeah, there's not going to be anything ongoing. Okay. And one can expect, realistically, a large proportion or even the vast majority of people are going to be relocating, many probably from Basildon. So you've got a redistribution of benefits within the local economy rather than creation of new benefits.
Well, that's an assumption, isn't it? We don't know.
It is an assumption, but I mean, yes, you might get somebody from the Isle of Skye, but I mean, realistically, they're probably going to be moving from a relatively local area. So, I mean, right back at you in the sense that with assuming that there's going to be this injection into the local economy, but we don't really know.
in terms of where people are going to be moving from, and therefore what the benefits
Yeah, and
will be.
there's, you know, the £4.4 million, and can't see where that comes from, can we?
Well, it's an estimate, isn't it, based on the number of people moving into the area, and therefore the contributions that they would make. So,
and therefore
yeah.
there's an assumption that they are new to the area, but we don't know that.
True.
Okay, and we can't assume, can we, that all of the new residents would be newly employed in Basildon. They may have already got a job but simply moving home.
Possibly, yeah.
And in terms of retail spend, and Mr. Wharton made the point, we've got to bear in mind the vast predominance of internet shopping, Amazon. Those weren't his words, those are mine, but he referred to the point.
Sorry, the vast majority of shopping now is online. Is that what you're suggesting?
Vast predominance. People use Amazon clearly quite regularly, don't they?
Yes.
I mean, that's just a sort of general point, really. Was to take judicial notice.
I think I can agree that people use Amazon and online shopping regularly. Whether or not it's the predominant, I don't know. I'm not a retailer.
That's my gloss, perhaps. But I mean, the owners of those companies are going to benefit rather than the local economy. So where this is all going is that it's fair, isn't it, to ascribe more limited weight to the economic benefits than you have. It's not as high as moderate.
Well, that's what you're putting to me. I think based on the evidence that's in the back of my proof, based on that report, which, accepting that I didn't write, but it's in my proof, that is the weight to which I've attributed based on that evidence.
All right. Well, as you say, you can't necessarily speak to it. That's okay. And I think the other reasons for all of the other benefits harms are clear. So I'm going to leave that there. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you, Matt.
Just a couple of questions from me, Mr. Fisher. Can I just clarify what you said on your summary of harm and weight? The loss of agricultural land, I think that was different to what you'd said in your proof.
Let me just check.
I don't know whether that was a mix.
Give me 1 second.
Page 21, maybe.
Yes. Yes, moderate weight, according to my proof.
According to your proof, moderate weight, limited harm,
That's
and
correct.
then what you just said was the other way around.
Forgive me, it's what is in my proof.
What's in the proof? Okay. Sorry, did you submit the application? Were you responsible for the scheme submitting the application?
Yes.
Yes. Why didn't the application plan, the site plan, include the blue line that's been referred to?
Sure. When you say the blue line, which blue line are we talking about?
Mr. Dadds was talking earlier about ownership of the remainder of the land beyond where the appeal site finishes.
Yeah.
And he made a comment about a blue line, which should have been included. Obviously, you know, if you're submitting a planning application, you red line the application site and then blue line any land that is in the same ownership.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head, sorry.
Okay. And just going through your list of benefits, ability to deliver high quality design and moderate weight. Just explain to me in the context of what the framework tells us in terms of design, how you arrived at moderate weight for that. And the expectation the framework puts on high quality design.
Yeah, so I think this is in relation to paras 126 and 130A of the MPPF.
Yeah.
Creation of high quality, beautiful, sustainable building places is fundamental to the planning and development process and what it should achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamental being the key word there, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then 130A, ensure that developments function well and add to the quality of the area, not just for the short term, but over the lifetime of the development. And we went through an extensive pre-app process. The Essex Design Guide was applied, and on the basis of that, I would attribute that moderate weight.
Yeah, so if that's what the framework's telling us you need to do, and you've been through the relevant design guidance with the local authority, that's an expectation, isn't it, in terms of what this scheme would be expected to deliver?
Yes.
Yeah, so how have you arrived at moderate weight then?
I think in the light of that, we may have to consider that is less than moderate weight.
Delivery time frame, I don't know if this has been mentioned, and apologies if it has, but have you got any, what is the expected time frame for delivery in terms of what we've heard about 5-year supply here?
I'm not sure of the planning timeframe in the planning statement.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen them.
The application was changed from an outline application through early discussions to a detailed application and discussion with the authority, so that at the point at which it was approved, we would be able to begin delivery immediately. So based on I guess an average build out of what, 50 to 60 homes per annum, which is standard on a normal housing development, it would work on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the Rule 6 party? No, thank you.
It's just one thing about that question on the blue line, just a good question, and what we might be able to come to. What I might do, that this doesn't know, but still we might be able to tell you maybe in a note or something that we circulate tomorrow morning. So I think it might be to do with the nature of the option that Blore had at the time that the application was submitted. But if I won't ask this witness because he doesn't know, but we'll perhaps put something in writing and circulate it to everybody just so you've got that piece of information. Just one question by way of re-examination, if that's all right. I don't think it really adds up to too much, but I showed you in examination in chief the existing extant affordable housing policy that set a target of 15 to 30%, and you said we're above that, and that fed into part the weight that you were attributing to that. Ms. Ollie in cross-examination said that policy is out of date, and you agreed to that, obviously. Then you referred to the SPD, and the inspector said, have I got that? And of course she's not got it, and it doesn't sound like she's going to get it, so that's that. But what she has got, of course, is the 2018 plan that's now been withdrawn, which is obviously an awful lot more up to date than the local plan. Can you just turn up very briefly, last reference for you, what the council's target was at that stage? So if you turn to core document 8.3, which is the plan. Page 147.
8.3, so.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, within that document, PDF 163, paginated 147. So PDF 163, paginated 147. Right. Just to sort of put it into context, if we just start, that's policy H26. You should have. Do you? Good. If you just look the page before the policy, you should have development viability at paragraph 11.2.32. Do you see?
Yes.
And there's a reference at 11.2.32 to the viability assessment.
Yes.
Which should determine that development within the borough is generally viable at 31%, taking account of other policy requirements, etc., etc.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then we see reflected in the policy itself, H26, the requirement was at 31% would be required on all sites of 11 units or more. Now, of course, that's never going to be a policy in a plan, but it's 20 or however many years it is, more 30 years, I don't know, more up to date than the target in the existing local plan. So so far as the 31% target goes, how does that impact on your attribution of weight to the delivery of affordable housing?
Well, again, we exceed, accepting that it's not policy, but we exceed it substantially.
Thank you very much. Those are all the questions. Thank you. And that indeed is our case.
Thank you. So unless anybody's desperate to start the conditions today, I think we'll probably
it's a roaring cry to do it now.
Call that today and start back tomorrow with the conditions, and then do the site visit.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so 9:30 tomorrow morning, then we'll reconvene. The inquiries adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.